Hello and welcome to Vail headquarters. I'm so happy you're with us today. My name is Rebecca Farnbach. Sometimes they call me the Temecula History Lady, and I'm here to take you on a tour. So when we walk through the portal here, actually it's an arch at the front of the property that takes us back in time and shows us 5 different areas of history that you will love to learn about. Won't you come with me? Well, from the very beginning, it was the Native American people who lived here. I'd like you to look off in the distance and imagine no buildings at all. There was just stones, trees, whatever nature provided, and the people and the animals. I'm probably not the best person to tell you about the Native American era of this property. I'd like to introduce you to my friend Myra.
Miyu Yam, Notun Myra Yaka, Non Pachangawish. So not long ago, before we had any non-native people living here in Temecula Valley, the lifestyle that we were living was very communal. We were set up in a clan system. So in that clan, think of your large extended family. So your grandparents and maybe their siblings and your parents and their siblings and all your cousins, and you're all living together. We all shared resources, but in sharing those resources, we all took responsibility for the care of the land. So the foods that were consumed a long time ago, and many of those foods are still consumed today. One of them was acorns. So we made kind of an acorn mush. It's called We Wish. And deer meat and quail meat, rabbits were consumed. Many of those meats were consumed in stews. And then you have all of our natural wild vegetables that are out, all of our natural lettuces and then our berries. Not long ago, we were outside all the time. You only came inside to sleep, if that. So because of the mild climate that we have here in the Temecula Valley and the differences in opinion of how you view your body, the clothing here was very minimal. The women wore a yucca fiber skirt and willow type aprons in front. In the colder months, you had your rabbit shawl or coat that you wore over, also rabbit blankets, and that was your normal. And when you have those deep relationships and those connections with the plants and the animals, your life is easy, your life is happy.
The second era that we're going to talk about here at Vail headquarters is the Stagecoach Era. This trail is so special. It's the only known urban segment of the Butterfield Stagecoach Trail in existence that we know of. Let me give you a little bit of background. Most of you have heard about the Butterfield Overland Stage Route, but did you know it was mail delivery was their primary function? In fact, if you lived in Boston and you wanted to get a letter to a friend in Temecula, California, you would have to know someone who was traveling here. Or you could take your chances and you could hand your letter to a guy on a ship that would go from Boston Harbor all the way around South America and up to San Francisco, and the letter would sit there until they heard of someone who was heading down to Temecula. Not a very good system. So what happened is Mr. John Butterfield made arrangements with the United States government, and he received a contract to carry mail. So he set up a route that went from Tipton, Missouri, and the end of the trail was in San Francisco. And it would take 22 days to get the mail from Tipton to San Francisco or vice versa. Now, in our cars, we could probably travel that amount of mileage in about 3 days easily. But 22 days, well, horses went slower than cars. And they wore out. And they'd have to change drivers too. Everybody would get too tired in 22 days. So Mr. Butterfield set up stops called stagecoach stops all along the way, about 14 to 22 miles apart. Here in Temecula, we had a Butterfield stagecoach stop south of the Temecula Creek behind me. Before the stagecoach arrived at the station, about a mile out from it, the driver would sound a bugle, and that would be the announcement to the station master, hurry up and get fresh horses ready. Then they'd do a quick change and on they would go. It was a very efficient system for back in the day, back before telephones, back before fax machines, and back before video. The Butterfield stage route here used an existing road called the Southern Emigrant Trail. When the gold rush was on, the 49ers, the people in 1849 going to the gold fields in Northern California, couldn't go by the northern routes to the gold fields because it would snow and they'd get stuck in the mountains. But this was a year-round route to the gold fields. People could safely travel through here. And I've read that up to 1,000 people came through a week during that time. The third era of significance here at the Vail headquarters is the wolf era. I'm not talking about wolf like an animal, the wolves. I'm talking about a man who came from Germany called Louis Wolf. Well, Louis Wolf was what we call an entrepreneur. That means a guy who's looking for a way to make a business. And he was pretty smart. He started out in the gold fields, but it wasn't working for him. So he came down to this area and found the Wolf store, which I'm showing you here, this adobe building. You know, adobe is made from the ground. It's compacted and with water and other straw and other things, and it's made into bricks. Can you imagine this building behind me was built in 1866? And look, it's still looking good, doesn't it? Let's step inside. If you'll look up, you can see the original redwood ceiling. Louis and his wife Ramona, who just happened to be half native, they ran the general store, the post office, and they also had hotel rooms along the side of the Wolf store. You see those places with the red doors? Each one of those were hotel rooms for people who would be coming on stagecoaches. A very famous writer came and stayed in the home of Louis and Ramona Wolf. Her name is Helen Hunt Jackson. Actually, she came to California to document how difficult a time Native American people had during that era. But what she found here was a story that she wanted to tell. So she took aspects, parts of Louis and Ramona's story and the place here to make her story Ramona. That book was written in the 1880s. In that story, someone named Hartzell, who was a German storekeeper with a half Native American wife, they play a big role. So our property here and the Hartzells or the Wolves are commemorated forever by Helen Hunt Jackson's visit here. This is now the fourth era, the Vail Ranch era. There was a rancher named Walter Vail who bought the property that was previously owned by Louis and Ramona Wolf and all the other property in the whole Temecula Valley. Imagine this, he owned 87,500 acres. That's a lot of land. This ranch was so big that if a man were assigned the job of checking the fence line around the outside of the ranch, it would take him a whole week on horseback to do that. Right now we're in the Cowboy bunkhouse. The cowboy bunkhouse is where the field hands and the cow hands lived. They had little dormitory rooms where they would sleep at night, and they would sing with guitars and play with cards in the evening. They'd wake up in the morning and go to breakfast in the cookhouse. Then they'd go over to the machinery barn to the office and find out what their job was for the day, and they would pick up tools for whatever job they were going to do.
Howdy folks, I'm here to show you all what it was like for the Vail Ranch cowboy. So a lot of gear he had to take with him when he was out there in the field on his horse. Now, one of the things, important tools, was his saddlebags. His saddlebags rode on the horse behind the saddle. And since this was a very large ranch, at lunchtime they didn't come in to eat. They stayed out there in the field and ate. One of the things that they would eat would be not only coffee, but they would eat hardtack. Hardtack, all it is flour, water, and salt. And as you can imagine by the name, it is very hard. In the saddlebags, also, they're out there to work. They're either branding cattle or they're fixing fences. They'd have their hammer for the staples. They'd have extra staples, extra barbed wire. They had their wire cutters, pliers, and of course they would have their gloves to protect their hands. Okay, in the morning when the cowboy got up, all he's got on is his long johns. First thing he uses is he puts his hat on. The hat was a very useful tool. It not only kept the sun off the cowboy, it helped keep the rain off his head. And also, he could actually, if they're out in the field and there's no water close by, he would take his canteen, put it in his hat, and he could give his horse a drink. Now the boot is really high. Well, not only it has to cover for the stickers, but we have a lot of rattlesnakes out here. And this is the typical area if you're walking and a rattlesnake surprises you and he lashes out and goes to bite you. The leather is thick enough to stop the teeth. Now on the boot, he would have the spurs. Now, if anybody has any horses, you know there can be ornery sometimes. Well, the spur is meant for the trained horse. The rider gets his attention. He tickles him in the ribs with these spurs. These are not sharp. And he gets the horse's attention, and then the horse will invariably do what the rider is telling him to do. The cowboys at the Vail Ranch, they only played cards, played guitar, but in the evening they would do their roping tricks and impress each other and their girlfriends. Okay. With the larger rope, the full-size rope, you help it go in a circle, but you notice it's the same thing. I'm using my wrist only. I'm holding the rope the same. I'm not moving my arm.
Hi, welcome to the Vail Ranch Blacksmith Shop. Blacksmithing back in the 1800s was a very large occupation, and about 1 in 5 people was a blacksmith back then. The reason being is because you didn't have a Home Depot or any other hardware stores. You would go to the blacksmith to get the stuff done. And so a blacksmith can do everything from, here's a repaired cooking handle for a pot. Here's knives that have been made, and they started off with a railroad spike. This chain is hand forged, and this eye is hand forged. And so blacksmiths also made branding irons, because in the Old West what had happened is they didn't have barbed wire or any fencing, and cattle would stray onto somebody's property. So to identify a person's cattle, they'd make what's a branding iron. So you see that we then put a heart on this. And so that was Vail Ranch's brand right there, a heart. What we're doing today is we're making a steak skewer, and it's going to end up looking like this. It started from a piece of metal like this that's completely rectangular. So we use what's called a coal forge. Coal is the oldest substance. You might think I'm the oldest guy here, but I'm really not. Its coal came from the dinosaur eras. And so it's quite a few million years old. So what happens with steel is when you heat it up, it gets a consistency like clay. And so you can take and mold it. And so now this is an orange color, and you just take it to the horn of the anvil, and I can just come around like this, and you see how pliable the metal is. I put the metal in there, and I cool an area, and that leaves an area still soft enough for me to move that area, and this area doesn't move because it's what's called quenching.
We'll put a nice little twist on this, just right here at the base. Just kind of move it around, like do a 360 degree.
And so he's making this look just like this.
Usually what we'll do is we'll brush it off. This right here is scale, so this kind of comes off. You want to get rid of this when it's on your anvil. That way you don't beat it back into the metal. And what I'll do is just sharpen the tip here. And keep sharpening it until it gets to a nice fine point, kind of like you see right here. That's how you make skewer.
I'm going to show you some of the equipment in here from the day, and some of it is representative of what was here, and a few things are original to the barn. This is a bicycle grinding wheel, and you set on it just like a bicycle, and you pump the pedals, and grinding wheel turned. You put water in the little cup to keep the your material from getting too hot, and you could sharpen very quickly, and it was a one-man operation. And here's an example of another little grinding wheel that would be used to sharpen things. The handle broke, and so the blacksmith, instead of just throwing it away, made a bracket and baling wire and a washer, and it works just as good as if it had the original handle in it. This is an example of another little grinding wheel, and this has the gears that are exposed. Most of these do, and we don't see those gears in our automobiles and lawnmowers and so forth today, but they're there. So the reason for the gears is that when you turn this handle one complete time, you've turned this wheel 16 times. And if you moved over one that didn't have gears, you'd have to be turning very, very fast to try to get the same work out of a grinding wheel.
I'm now going to tell you about the 5th era in the history of Vail headquarters. This is an era that I have lived through. So we pick up where the Vail Company sold their holdings to a big developer, and this formed the new city of Rancho, California. It was 1998, and nobody had lived in these buildings or worked in these buildings. Everything was getting run down. So we saw an article in the newspaper, a letter to the editor that said the building should be torn down. When my husband, Daryl, and I read that letter to the editor, we decided we had to respond immediately. My husband and I composed a response, and we told them if all these buildings were torn down, then all this history would be lost. It came about, the developer decided to bulldoze an adobe portion of the foreman's house. It made us mad. We told him that he shouldn't do that. We told him in advance that it should not happen. He did it anyway, and he said that building's not old. So since we couldn't appeal to him, we decided we'd have to have a lawsuit. That's when you appeal to someone who is of a higher authority, a judge. 6 months after we filed, we had the assurance that 4 acres would be saved of the Vail headquarters site, and no more historic buildings would be torn down. So we've talked about all the different eras of history here at Vail headquarters. Let's review the buildings that we have seen. The Wolf Store, the oldest building on the property. You'll remember it was once owned by Lewis and Ramona Wolf, and now it's a coffee shop. The Cookhouse. It was once the home of Lewis and Ramona Wolf. During the Vale Era, it was the dining hall, the cookhouse, where the cowboys would come eat. And now, it is still a cookhouse. There are 4 restaurants inside where you can order different kinds of food. Over here, we have the foreman's house. The foreman was the boss of all the cowboys, and he watched over things during the Vail Era. It is now called Chef Flavor, a nice restaurant with amazing food. Next to Chef Flavor, we have the water building. There was a dispute about water rights a long time ago during the Vail Era. So the Vails built this building to study weather patterns. The next building is the bunkhouse. The bunkhouse is where the cowboys lived. We have now a craft store where you can do painting and receive instruction. And we have a pizzeria where you build your own pizzas. Next, we cross the Butterfield Trail and we see the blacksmith shop. The blacksmith made all of the equipment, all the things that you needed to have someone make for you because there wasn't a hardware store nearby. In the rest of the machinery barn, we have a brewery, an escape room, and in the old barn office, we have Bucket of Nails, which is custom furniture. The last building is a 2-story building designed to look like the old mule barn that burned down in 1929. Now it is the home for several businesses. You will enjoy your time at Vail if you come back in person. Bring your families with you. Give them the tour. And if you need little prompters, we have put some plaques in granite next to the wagon wheels that you see throughout the property. So here you are on Vail headquarters, 4 acres, restored buildings. We saved the Butterfield Stagecoach Trail going down through the center. Each of those original owners of the buildings, each of those original purposes of the buildings can be remembered fondly. And this is your place as people in Temecula to remember and savor the past.